They said my role had become redundant. That's how they put it. No ceremony, no thank you speech, just a few clipped words in a glass-walled room that smelled of lemon disinfectant. We're restructuring. Your department is being absorbed. Today will be your last day. That was it. No mention of the 19 years I'd spent there. No acknowledgement that I'd arrived before they even installed the espresso machine in the break room. Just a young HR manager whose name I never bothered to remember, sliding a small box toward me like it contained a consolation prize. I didn't say much. Didn't need to. I just nodded, picked up the box, and folded my portfolio under my arm. The same worn leather one my wife gave me the year before she died. My name is Martin Ellison, and I'm 59. Or I was when this all started. I was a financial controller at Creighton Manufacturing, back when we still made things that lasted longer than the packaging. Back before venture capital found its way into our boardroom, I kept the books straight. That was my job. I made sure the numbers reflected the truth, even when people didn't want the truth to show. On that last day, no one met my eye. Not in the elevator, not at the front desk. People who used to share Monday morning coffee with me suddenly found great fascination in the floor tiles. I didn't take it personally. People survived by staying quiet. Only the security guard Dennis, a kid who liked to talk about car engines and night school, whispered an awkward, "Sorry, Mr. Ellison," as he followed me to my office. "It's not your fault," I told him. I packed slowly. Not because I was sentimental, but because I had things to take care of. A few framed certificates, a photo of my wife, and one flash drive. That was the important part. 3 years of records lived on that drive, not doctored spreadsheets, not budget forecasts, evidence, unusual vendor payments, consulting fees routed through shell companies, expense approvals with signatures that didn't match any known executive. They thought they were showing the old guy the door. They had no idea what the old guy had been documenting for years. The thing is, I wasn't always like this, paranoid, too suspicious. I used to believe in the place. When Creighton was run by Ray Creighton himself, the man showed up at 6 a.m. in steel-toed boots and walked the factory floor before anyone else had even clocked in. "Books don't lie," he used to tell me. "People do. Your job is to make sure the books can't be bent." That stuck with me. After Ray retired, the company changed hands at first. The changes were subtle, logos redesigned, slogans updated, strategy decks with lots of graphs and very little meaning. Then came the executives. Shiny suits, aggressive smiles, big promises. They talked about growth, about efficiencies, and then people started disappearing. My friend Alfred from procurement, gone after flagging duplicate invoices. Linda in compliance, reassigned, then let go. No explanations ever given. I knew the air was changing, so I started taking notes, quietly, carefully. Not because I wanted revenge, because I wanted to be ready, because I remembered what Ray had said, because my wife, God rest her, believed in telling the truth, even when it hurts. After her funeral, I threw myself into work. Spreadsheets became therapy. Ledger balances replaced silence. I wasn't looking for a crusade, but the numbers started whispering, then shouting, and eventually I couldn't ignore them anymore. By the time I was escorted out, the flash drive in my pocket held enough irregularities to make an auditor choke. They thought they were erasing me. What they were really doing was letting me loose. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, a single lamp on, 2 fingers of rye whiskey in a glass that hadn't been touched since the day my daughter graduated law school. She called me around 9 p.m. "Dad, I heard what happened." I gave her the version that wouldn't worry her. "Restructuring, just corporate stuff." There was a long pause. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I said, but they're not. Because by then I had already drafted the first report. Not a rant, not an accusation. Just a simple, calm summary of what I'd seen: dates, names, dollar amounts, supporting documents, and 2 email addresses waiting in the to field. 1 at the State Financial Crimes Bureau, 1 at the *** Securities Enforcement Division ***. My hand hovered over the send key. And then I closed the laptop. Not yet. I wasn't ready. The evidence was strong, but strong isn't enough when the people you're dealing with can afford lawyers whose suits cost more than your car. I needed more, and I'd find it. Not because I was angry, but because I wasn't done telling the truth. Not yet. The next morning, I shaved, pressed a shirt, straightened a tie. Old habits die hard. Even though I had nowhere to be, I still made the coffee the way my wife used to like it. Slow drip, with a splash of cream that barely changed the color. Then I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in nearly 6 years. Ellison. The voice on the other end was sharp, alert. "Hey Sam," I said. "It's Martin. I've got something you're going to want to hear." Sam Burke was a federal investigator, white-collar crimes division. He and I had crossed paths in the late 90s when I flagged a subcontractor funneling public funds into dummy accounts. That case took 2 years, 4 arrests, and 1 nervous breakdown. Not mine. Sam listened while I laid out the highlights. Vendor shell games, falsified audits, missing inventory. I didn't overstate it. I didn't dramatize. "I've got dates. I've got files. I've got names," I said quietly. "I just don't know how deep this goes." "Meet me," Sam replied without hesitation. "Somewhere quiet. We agreed on a spot halfway between our towns, a greasy spoon diner where the coffee came in chipped mugs and the waitresses called you hun. Sam arrived 10 minutes late and sat without ordering. "You look like hell," he said. "Thanks." I slid the flash drive across the table. "You said this was about financials. What kind of exposure are we talking?" 3 years, multiple divisions, shady consulting firms that don't exist on paper, procurement deals that make no sense, and I think they're moving money out through fictitious expense accounts. He didn't say anything for a long time, just stared at the small silver drive like it might explode. "You haven't gone to the press?" he finally asked. "No." "Why not?" "Because I want this done properly," I said. "No headlines, no drama, just the truth, quietly, thoroughly." He pocketed the drive. "All right, I'll start digging." As I left the diner, I noticed a dark SUV idling 2 blocks down, windows tinted to dark for legality. I wasn't paranoid yet, but I logged the plate number anyway. That night I went back through my own files. I reviewed every spreadsheet, every ledger note I'd saved. That's when I remembered Tasha. She was a junior analyst who used to shadow my department before she got shifted to strategic innovation, which meant God knows what. She was smart, quiet, and had a talent for sniffing out inconsistency. I found her on LinkedIn. Sent a vague message, "Hey, long time, got a question about an old expense report." "Mind chatting?" She replied 3 hours later. "Can't talk here. Call this number from a landline that told me everything I needed to know." I drove to my cousin's house, an old farmhouse with a rotary dial still hanging by the kitchen window. I dialed. "Tasha, Mr. Ellison. You're not safe at Creighton," I said. "They're covering tracks. I think it's bigger than fraud. Maybe criminal exposure." Her voice lowered to a whisper. "They erased 3 months of inventory movement logs last week. The backups vanished. The IT guy who flagged it was let go the next day. You have access to the old logs. Some, not everything, but I've been taking screenshots. Send them to a secure email. I'll text you the address." After I hung up, I felt the first drop of fear. Not caution, real fear. If they were wiping logs, that meant they knew someone was watching, and they weren't being sloppy anymore. They were being careful, calculated. I didn't sleep much that night, not because I was worried about myself, because I started to understand just how far this could reach. The next morning, I visited the local bank where I'd kept a safety deposit box for years. I placed a copy of the drive inside, along with a letter addressed to my daughter, Claire. "If anything happens to me," it read, "give this to Samuel Burke at the Office of Federal Investigations. No one else." Claire didn't know what was happening yet. She didn't need to, not until it was time. 2 days later, I received a plain white envelope in the mail. No return address, no markings. Inside was a single sheet of paper, printed with 4 words. ***, stop this now, Martin. ***, no signature. I burned the envelope in the sink. The next day, my internet went down for the first time in a decade. When I called the provider, they claimed my router had been deregistered from their end. Then my cell phone began receiving password reset texts for services. I didn't use they were testing me, seeing how I'd react, but I didn't take the bait. Instead, I went quiet. It was time to gather allies. They say when the machine starts making noise, it's already too late to stop it. I remembered that as I drove out to a rural bar off Highway 73 to meet someone I hadn't spoken to in nearly a year. Neil Cass, former procurement lead, been let go 6 months before me. No fanfare. At the time, they claimed his division had been absorbed. Funny word. Like a sponge, quietly soaking up evidence. Neil greeted me with a handshake that felt like an apology. "I heard," he said, "about me." He nodded. "They're cleaning house." "Funny," I said. "Seems more like they're burying the bodies." He didn't laugh. "Over to cheap beers." I told him what I'd found. Not everything. Just enough to let him know the water was deep and dangerous. I knew something was off when vendor payments started doubling for half the shipments, he said, rubbing his temples. "But you speak up, you're out." So I started documenting. He reached into his jacket and slid over a small envelope. Inside were 4 printed spreadsheets, each highlighted with notes in Neil's jagged handwriting. Double billing, repetitive codes, no delivery logs for half of it. He looked over his shoulder, then leaned in. "They're not just bleeding money, Martin, they're hiding it." That word again, hiding. I left the bar with a heavier step than I arrived. The puzzle was coming together too fast to clean, like a structure already built in the dark, waiting for someone to accidentally flip on the lights. The next morning, Claire showed up at my door. My daughter, the corporate lawyer. .com. Smart, skeptical by nature. "Dad," she said, "we need to talk." She'd received a voicemail, blocked number. No voice, just the sound of typing. Mechanical, deliberate. And then, a whisper. "Ask your father where the numbers are buried." I didn't want to tell her everything, but she wasn't a child anymore, so I showed her the backup drive. Her face changed. From concern to something deeper. Focus. Calculation. "You need a legal firewall," she said. "You're sitting on a corporate bomb. They're going to come after you, not just to silence you, to discredit you." That night, she filed a formal whistleblower protection notice on my behalf. Under federal statutes, she advised me to avoid all personal communication devices, She also gave me one very specific piece of advice. Don't meet anyone alone, even the people you trust. The next day Tasha sent over screenshots, dozens of them, deleted logs, phantom vendors, and something new. A contract buried under layers of subapprovals, a subcontractor with an address that didn't exist on any state registry. I did a quick reverse lookup. The address belonged to a storage facility 2 hours outside the city. I rented a car under a pseudonym and drove there on a cold Thursday morning. The unit was empty, except for 2 sealed crates, labeled calibration equipment. I pried one open with a crowbar borrowed from the rental attendant. Inside were military-grade sensors. I froze. These weren't just industrial supplies, they were components for defense vehicles, the kind of things that required federal certifications and ethical sourcing audits. And the shipment dates, 6 months ago, but there was no record of them in Creighton's public financial disclosures. I took photos, logged the serial numbers, then I got out. Back home I sent the images to Sam. His reply was fast and blunt. Asterisk, asterisk, this is Department of Defense. Jurisdiction now. Do not go back. Asterisk, asterisk, I asked what would happen next. He didn't answer for 12 hours. When he did, it was with a single text. Asterisk, asterisk, they know we're moving. Be careful. Asterisk, asterisk. That night, I noticed a strange van circling my block. 3 times before disappearing into the fog. I checked the locks, closed the blinds, but I knew it was just a matter of time. 2 days later, I received a burner call from a voice I hadn't heard in years. Maggie Chen, who had handled regulatory compliance before leaving for what she claimed was a sabbatical, was warned not to talk to anyone. She whispered, "But I heard what you're doing." "How much do you know?" I asked. "Enough to be scared, but not enough to stay silent." We met at an empty co-working office downtown, rented under my daughter's firm's name. Maggie arrived with a folder, physical, untraceable, and trembling hands. They were falsifying audit trails, she said, backdating inspections, sending out batches with missing certifications. I only caught it because one file had 2 versions saved an hour apart, one real, one edited. "And you saved the real one?" She nodded. "I printed everything and mailed it to myself. That way it's postmarked. If I disappear, it becomes evidence." Maggie was no amateur. In her folder were memos from compliance officers who no longer worked at Creighton, all signed, all dated, all warning about improper regulatory filings. "This is a machine, Martin," she said. "Not just one, or to bad actors. It's systemic. They've built a whole structure to siphon money, bypass safety checks, and sell off assets without the board knowing." I stared at the documents. Some were over my head, legal language and policy codes, but one phrase repeated enough times to stay burned into my memory. Asterisk, asterisk, expedited liquidation strategy. Asterisk, asterisk, Claire translated that for me later. They're selling the company out from under itself to themselves, probably. Shuffling assets to offshore entities, then filing for bankruptcy protection once they've gutted the pension fund. And the workers' collateral. That word, that disgusting, cruel word. I looked out the window where commuters passed in headphones and suits. None of them knew. None of them would ever know until it was too late. Unless someone said something, unless someone forced the machine to stop. That someone was going to be me. 3 weeks, that's how long it took to gather everything. Every file, every signature, every coded manipulation. By the end of it, I had 4 hard drives, each a complete record of a system built to look clean while rotting. From the inside out. Claire reviewed it all with a prosecutor's calm precision. "You realize what you're doing, right?" She asked me one night as I spread invoices across her dining table. "This isn't just whistleblowing, this is federal. Exposure, multi-agency, national contracts. You're poking a bear that eats people for breakfast." I nodded. "Let it eat," I said. Claire blinked, then smiled just faintly. "You really were an accountant this whole time?" I didn't answer. I just kept building the timeline. That same week, Sam Burke called. "The Department of Defense is interested now. FBI is already watching Creighton. We have enough for a sting, if you're willing to help." We planned. They needed a meeting, something that would trigger response where one of the major players would speak freely, off the record, unaware they were walking into a trap. I knew just the bait, a severance package. The company had sent me another one, updated language, larger payout, and the same non-disclosure clause buried in legal fluff. All I had to do was show interest, so I did. I called the number on the cover letter. Got patched through. "Martin," a familiar voice purred. "So glad you called. Valerie Kent, Vice President of Strategic Affairs, also known internally at least as the closer." She didn't bother with small talk. "We'd love to finalize this with dignity. Perhaps a quiet meeting off-site." I proposed the Wexford Hotel downtown, neutral territory, elegant enough for corporate sensibilities. Also already rented out under a different name by the FBI. Valerie agreed. "Tomorrow, 10 a.m. bring whatever questions you may have. We'll clear everything up." That night, I couldn't sleep, not out of fear. It was something else. Something I hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. At 9:55 the next morning, I walked into the Wexford's smallest boardroom. Valerie sat at the far end of the table in a tailored blazer. sipping from a porcelain cup. Two men I didn't recognize flanked her probably in-house counsel. They didn't stand Martin, she said, as if greeting an old colleague. Shall we? I didn't reply, just sat, placed my leather folder on the table and slid the severance agreement toward her. Have a few clarifications before signing. Of course, this includes protections for all historical company activity, correct? Yes, said the attorney on her right. Any proprietary knowledge, financial details, or internal systems you may have been exposed to would fall under confidentiality, even questionable practices. Valerie didn't flinch. Standard language, Martin. All companies protect their internal data, even data that might suggest federal contract fraud. The room stiffened. What are you implying? The second attorney said, his voice dropping in pitch. I leaned back. I'm not implying anything. I'm informing you that your activities, specifically invoice falsification tied to Department of Defense suppliers, have already been reported thoroughly. Valerie blinked. I beg your pardon. The door behind me opened. Sam Burke entered, flanked by two federal agents in plain suits and sharp eyes. Good morning, Sam said. Miss Kent, we have a warrant for all Creighton Manufacturing financial records, audit logs, and compliance communications dating back for years. One attorney shot to his feet. This is an ambush. No, I interrupted. This is a reckoning. Another door opened. Tasha stepped in, escorted by a federal liaison. So did Neil and Maggie. Each had agreed to testify. Each had provided separate corroborating documentation. The pieces had finally moved into place. Valerie's voice wavered. You're making a mistake. No, I said. You did. Years ago, you thought no one would notice that the people checking the books were disposable, that the old man with the tie and the quiet eyes didn't matter. I stood. You forgot something important. What? That? Numbers remember, even when people forget. Sam leaned forward, voice calm. Miss Kent, you are not under arrest at this moment, but you are advised not to leave the state and to retain counsel. Your offices are being secured as we speak. Valerie didn't answer. Her eyes weren't focused anymore. They were staring past me somewhere far off, a place where the machine had already stopped turning. 6 months later, I walked past the chain-link fence of what used to be Creighton Manufacturing, only now the sign on the front gate had changed. Asterisk, asterisk, Creighton Legacy. Works, asterisk, asterisk, employee-owned, integrity-driven. The old machinery still hummed, the same humming I'd known for years, but the atmosphere had changed, lighter, cleaner. The place had been placed under federal receivership after the investigation. The executives gone, arrested, indicted, or quietly stripped of titles and dignity. Some turned state's evidence, others didn't. Valerie Kent took a plea, so did the CEO. The procurement manager disappeared across the border and was picked up at a beach resort in Belize. I didn't testify in court. I didn't need to. My job was to remember to make sure the numbers couldn't be rewritten anymore. The pension fund recovered not in full, but enough. Most retirees would be okay. They'd keep their homes with their peace. I helped the transition team set up new controls, real controls, financial safeguards that couldn't be overridden by strategic decisions. One afternoon, I stopped by for the last time, just to check the books out of habit. Mostly. The young manager smiled at me. We're good, Mr. Ellison. Numbers balance. Down to the cent. I nodded, handed back my visitor badge, and walked out the door I'd once been escorted through in disgrace. Outside, Claire was waiting in her car. You still think it wasn't revenge? She asked as we pulled out of the lot. It wasn't, I said. It was maintenance. Just a little overdue. She smiled. You know, not everyone gets to bring down a corrupt machine and still walk away. I didn't bring it down, I replied. They did, with their greed, their shortcuts. I just turned the lights on. The story had already slipped out of the news cycle, replaced by newer, shinier scandals. That was fine. The headlines weren't the point. Later that evening, I stood in my home office with a small box of files labeled indexed complete. I sealed it, wrote a label for archive. Then I slid it into the back of the closet, behind old winter coats and tax folders. Let someone else dig it up, if they need to someday. I made a cup of tea. Sat by the window. The world outside was quiet. No more shadowy cars on the street. No more voicemails from blocked numbers. Just wind. And silence. And the dull, sweet weight of something finished. Not revenge. Not justice. Even. Just truth. And that was enough. That was always enough.